As you may notice, this track sounds a little bit darker and a little bit thicker and meaner than the other ones. That's due in part to the new tuning that I have here. Those of you that have been listening to nu metal and metal in recent years are very familiar with the new tunings that are coming out. A lot of it started with the advent of the 7-string guitar, where guys wanted to start tuning down. And even in the early 90s, some bands like Alice in Chains were starting to do a tuning that I'm in right now, which is where you take your E string and you tune it down to a D. We call this a drop D tuning, where essentially you drop it down one whole step. Now it's easy to do because you already have another D on your bass guitar, correct? Right there. So as we're tuning and you're dropping your E string down to a D, you've already kind of got a built-in tuning mechanism right here. Of course, using a professional tuner is with your right hand and some different picking things too. Detuning. It's cool, it's metal. When you're first starting out playing bass, you, like myself, when I was starting, I always wondered why my bass didn't quite sound like all those records that I was listening to. Well, fear not. They've spent thousands of dollars and there's a lot of expensive trickery and gadgets and a lot of high-tech equipment used in making records. But for our purposes of beginning as bassists, there are a few things that we can do to try to alter our tone, to try to get the most pleasant and pleasing sound that we like for how it is that we want to play. I recommend on the bass to always turn the volume of the bass up as far as it will go. I also recommend turning the tone knobs up as far as they'll go as well. I like to get as much output out of the bass into the amplifier as possible. Now, if you want to get a more rounder, kind of bigger sound reminiscent of some of the vintage metal like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, you can turn up the bass control on your amplifier. That will give that big, warm, bottom sound. If you want to get a little bit more of that kind of 80s sound, which is more reminiscent maybe of what Iron Maiden has, try turning up your treble knob. You can get that kind of khaki or slappier kind of sound going on. If you want to try to get what's more kind of considered a modern metal bass sound, and certainly something that's reminiscent of the new metal sound, maybe something like what Fieldy of Korn has been doing, try taking your mid-range control, if you have it on your amplifier, and turning it down. Essentially what that does in the EQ curve is it kind of scoops that out. That's why we have that sound with where the metal guitars kind of fit right in there, but the bass isn't in there. Ultimately, in the sound spectrum, you've got the drums on the bottom, the bass fit in there on top of that with the guitars on top. So if you kind of think of everything as layering up there, you might be able to get a bass sound that sort of fits somewhere in between there, especially as you start playing with some of your friends or you're playing in bands and often playing with the guitar. It's very hard to sometimes get your bass to stand out around the guitar. Again, a lot of that has to do with how we finger the bass, a lot of it has to do with how we pluck the bass, and that in particular is why I like to use a pick. But in either case, experiment and have fun and come up with a tone and a sound and an equipment setting that's right for you. All right, I want to talk to you for a moment about practicing, because it's something that has kind of a stigma, almost like doing homework. You know, it's something we all have to do. It's something that just the sound of it makes us not want to do it. But yet we all practice. I still practice. And I think anybody who has been very proficient at their instrument, and certainly those of us who have become professionals, we need to continue to practice. The things that we've outlined so far in this program, there's some simple things that, just as far as learning how to put your fingers on the neck, learning how to use your picking and plucking hand, going through scales. These are things that are very basic and very elementary, and really the knowledge that you can gain from these things if you keep studying is really never ending. So what I like to do when practicing is I like to take some time where I know I'm going to sit down and I'm actually going to practice some difficult passages. These may be things that are frustrating for me, things that I can't play up to speed, and I want to sit down and I want to start slow. I always practice with a drum machine or a metronome. I don't think any of us are ever beyond that. Having good time is a critical part of being a solid and found musician. Then moving on from there, I like to then take another few minutes where I can just move on and be creative. In the musical world, we call this ad-libbing. And sometimes for us that are songwriters, this is a time where we can sort of forget about the rules, not really throw them out, but forget about them for a while, and sit and explore on our instrument and have fun. That's often one of the things that kind of takes us off into a whole nother dimension of our playing. And most importantly, I like to always have instruments available to me. You know, if you've only got one bass, it's fine. Don't always put it away in the case so that it requires effort to get it out and you have to clean it off and plug it in and turn on your amp and get everything going. Keep it in a place where you see it, because oftentimes an instrument that sits there that looks inviting is something you're going to want to sit down and play. And you may not even always have time to actually have a set regimen for your practicing. Better to put in 15 to 30 minutes every day because it's fun for you and you enjoy it, than not touching the instrument for a week and trying to pick it up and cram and try to, almost like you're doing an exam for school. So I think most importantly, practicing can be a very fun and an enjoyable, and most importantly, a very rewarding part of your playing. Thank you for joining me here with Volume 1. We've gone through some very basic and rudimentary things about being a beginning bass player, most importantly to becoming a well-rounded musician. Throughout my career, I've of course had a lot of professional accolades and accomplished a lot of things that I always wanted to do, but most importantly through all of it, I've had a lot of fun. And the foundation of it all is I'm a musician. So make sure you keep practicing all of the things that we've talked about in this program so that you'll be ready to move on to Volume 2. I'll see you from the stage.